Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us on a Monday. Today, we are delighted to have an incredible panel. Before we get started, I wanted to set the stage, tell you a little bit about what our conversation will be about today, and then also tell you a little bit about our society. Thank you for joining the TAG DEI Society. We like to talk about interesting intersections between technology and equity. And today we are delighted for Women's Month to be joined by an esteemed panel to talk about an incredibly complex issue. So these four extraordinary women are going to help us navigate a little bit about AI, cybersecurity, which is currently at the forefront of conversation, legislation, and even a little bit of concern by many. In the context of this conversation, we want to talk through how technology can be used to amplify existing resources, but not to replace them. We don't want to silo technology. We want to continually think about ways to support survivors and practitioners, but make it accessible and multi-use and ensure that we're bringing stakeholders to the table so that emerging technologies can be developed and rolled out ethically and as part of a community. We also want to provide you with awareness of resources that are available on the ground here in Georgia. And hopefully this conversation will give you new thoughts, new ideas about the future of AI and the knowledge and the resources that are already in place. So with that in mind, I'm going to get started and give you some quick panel introductions of who you'll be hearing from, and then we'll start our conversation. So starting off with Dr. Courtney Crooks. Dr. Crooks is a licensed psychologist. She's the principal research scientist at GTRI, Georgia Tech Research Institute, adjunct faculty at Georgia Tech School of Cybersecurity and Privacy. She is also an adjunct assistant professor at Emory University. She has 20 years experience in applied research, and she has an incredible wealth of information, including things specific to this conversation. She has an education certificate in cybersecurity. She also has expertise in forensic psychology, behavioral analysis, and human-centered design of AI and other technologies. And she will be leading us much of this conversation. She's also joined by Sneha Talawalkar, who is a graduate teaching assistant. She has a master's of science in cybersecurity. She formerly led a security expert team at IBM, and she has human-centered security challenge experience, AI safety and security experience, data security, data privacy, and is, of course, a member of the Society of Women Engineers and AI Safety Initiative Club here at Georgia Tech. We're also going to welcome Yua Chen. Yua is currently the legal advocate at the Women's Resources Center since 2015. She has an incredible range of experiences. She'll talk a little bit about them later, including temporary protective order filing. She guides clients through the court process, and she offers a lot of support and psychological safety while they're planning that process. She also has experience for this conversation, very wonderful experience on data management, data analysis, and statistical grant reports. So a lot of technological experience as well. She holds a master's degree in economics from Emory University, as well as being a legal representative in the state of Georgia. She also holds an economics degree from the National Taiwan Institute or University, where she is a lawyer in Taiwan as well. And of course, Kimberly August is joining us. Kimberly is the Deputy General Counsel of Litigation and Regulatory Services Group at the Housing Authority of the City of Atlanta. Many of you often refer to it as the Atlanta Housing. And so we'll often reference it in this conversation as Atlanta Housing. She has a lot of experience with the Violence Against Women Act, with fair housing. She interfaces with advocacy groups and has a host of legal experience, 29 years plus as a corporate counsel in sectors like energy, housing, employment, federal housing programs. She also has some fascinating experience working on short films. She's also, I hear, one of the best cooks in Georgia. So an incredible resource to add to this. And she'll be joined a little bit further on by her colleague, Alita McDaniel. Alita's been employed at the Atlanta Housing for 16 years in customer service, and she handles customer escalations and things around the violence against women. She is also an ordained and licensed preacher here in Georgia. So this is our panel. We're so grateful to have these incredible women with us today. Let's start by, again, setting the stage for you with some questions. So Dr. Crooks, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your research. we will start with you because you two really were the catalyst of this conversation. Can you tell me a little bit about the work that you're doing around AI and advocacy?
Certainly. Yes, thank you for having Sneha and I here today. We're pleased to be here, and we really appreciate the great introduction. Good afternoon, everyone on the panel and the audience. I'm going to share, if you don't mind, just a few orienting slides. Give me one moment to get those up here. Let's see. I think that was about to go.
I saw him a second ago and then disappeared.
Okay. All right. I'm gonna have to, yes. Okay. So I'll start the slideshow then.
Perfect.
Okay. There we go. Okay. So you should see them now. Okay. So this is just some orienting facts that you will also hear more about later in the panel, but I wanted to start out with this, given that domestic abuse is the main topic, along with how can we use technology to help mitigate some of the issues that we face related to domestic abuse. So you mentioned the VAWA, and I'm really glad that we have an expert on the panel related to the VAWA. The VAWA was first authorized in 1994. It was recently reauthorized. The U.S. Department of Justice addresses domestic abuse under the phrase domestic violence, and the definition is here. The word violence can be a little bit misleading because domestic abuse does not necessarily have to include physical violence. It often does, but it doesn't have to. So that's just something I always like to start out with. It really matters the way we talk about it. And of course, one of the things that increased during COVID-19 was the rates of domestic abuse. This was pretty much worldwide, including in the US. This is from the CDC. About a year or so ago. The most recent facts is of a few months ago. And so our viewpoint that we adopt in our research is that domestic abuse is a public health issue. This is the CDC's viewpoint as well. We are also informed by conceptualizations of domestic abuse that emerge from theory, research, and practice around domestic abuse. So one of those conceptualizations is that domestic abuse is traditionally understood as acts of physical violence, but as I mentioned, we don't often think enough about the psychological and other aspects of domestic abuse. So our research focuses more specifically on the psychological aspects and how do we helpfully use technology to mitigate some of the psychological manipulations that may go on during and even after a relationship ends. So reality, domestic abuse can take all of these forms, okay? So physical, sexual, emotional, psychological, medical neglect or interference, reproductive, financial, legal manipulation, threats to immigration status, friends and family connections, et cetera. And it may also involve a third party in the service of the abusive goals. And sometimes that third party isn't even aware of what's going on. Okay, so our current research is the following. It's based on recent studies that have highlighted an emerging trend for the role of artificial intelligence-based approaches in psychotherapy. Some potential benefits of incorporating various forms of AI into aspects of providing psychotherapy include augmenting current psychotherapy workforce, offloading administrative tasks that could be automated to some degree, and even facilitating training on specialized psychotherapy techniques, or almost like consultation in a way, if you're basing your AI on a knowledge-based technique. So likewise, personalized AI-based technology for domestic abuse recovery may help to mitigate complex challenges encountered during recovery, such as sophisticated attacks involving technology enablers that are exploited by abusers. So these are technologies like our cell phones, social media, GPS tracking devices, things like this. And there's other examples as well. Those are just the few off the top of my head that are meant for one purpose, but they can be used for a secondary purpose and exploited by abusers. So this is one thing we try to fight against, using technology against technology. Only our technology is being used to mitigate these risks. So some of these challenges involved in working with human-centered AI, which is What we are focused on, human-centered means the human is at the center of the design. So we start with the human's involved all the way through, and we end with the human. So in this case, our humans are our stakeholders, are our potential victims or our survivors or our patients, as well as those people who work with survivors and patients and victims, right? So people who are impacted directly by the thing we're trying to design. One of the questions is, how do we design AI technology so that it's not this black box, we don't really know what's going on or how it arrived at its decisions, but those decisions or those processes are transparent to the user. We also have to think about, what do we mean by trust and trustworthiness related to artificial intelligence? And there are other ethical issues as well that we would need to consider. So our functional aspirations are the following, and we'll just look at these real briefly. But in future research, we'll continue to explore the potential of collecting real-world data from experienced coercive control or domestic abuse scenarios with clinicians and their patients in the clinical setting. We plan to gather information directly on user community challenges through stakeholder interviews, and we plan to assess the safety and feasibility of the use of potential AI-facilitated technology solutions to complement traditional psychotherapy interventions that are used successfully with domestic abuse survivors. So there are many different kinds of interventions that as community members, as professionals, as psychotherapists, as lawyers, et cetera, that we might use with domestic abuse survivors to help them. And so we want to design AI solutions that can help facilitate whatever those might be, and not be just focused in on one kind of, let's say, clinical intervention. But we want different kinds of clinicians to be able to use whatever tools that we develop. So this is just a little storyboard that we put together to kind of envision how you might incorporate AI. So there might be a tablet or a phone involved that actually is the mediator for accessing the AI and for working with the AI. So at the beginning, the clinician and the patient, let's just say this is a psychotherapy scenario. A clinician and a patient would meet like we normally do, and we talk about what the goals and what the challenges are for the patient. And we do some treatment planning ahead. And so the clinician goes after the session and records and studies all the historical data for their patient and thinks about what they might work on when they meet again. In this case, we would have an AI that might actually help generate scenarios that the clinician could work through with the patient that are based on the patient's real experiences. And those scenarios then in future sessions may be used to stop and assess at certain points, what are the things that the clinician may help the patient work on to mitigate whatever's happening in that scenario. Now, this could be something like a basic cybersecurity intervention, cyber hygiene, something that the patient can do with their device to stop whatever vulnerability is being exploited. Or it could be something that is a little bit deeper and needs to be worked on as session material when they're done working with the AI. And that's the point at which the clinician can actually leverage their own training and their own expertise and their own particular style of delivering psychotherapy to work on that potential session material with the patient. And this goes on, for a series of sessions. And the clinician may also be able to use the material generated by the AI in post-session processing to think about future sessions. And so I guess with this, I will turn it over to Sneha, my colleague and graduate student, to talk about safety of AI for a few moments.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Kirks, and good afternoon, everyone. Dr. Kirks, could you please go back to that slide? I think those were the points we took from the AI RMF. AI risk management framework is a relatively new framework, as we all know. And it does list, the slide. Thank you. So the points that we listed as basic characteristics of a trustworthy AI system, according to that risk management framework, all the AI actors are responsible for ensuring that these characteristics are present in the AI systems that we develop to make them trustworthy. Now, in addition to this, we decided that we will use user studies, and the tool will not be tested with real users until all the safety properties are met. So we are still in the first phase of the tool development. As Dr. Kirk said, we are going to use what is known as scenario generator for the scenario walkthrough process. And I have built the first prototype design of the tool, which uses instance-based learning. So that's about the tool for now.
It's so exciting, and it's such an exciting field in general. It's on the edge of everything. So this brings us to an interesting part of the conversation. As we watch the way that innovation can ensure survivors and stakeholders have these additional tools to move forward, while we're absorbing all of this, let's reverse a little bit and think about the issue itself. So people, many of whom are women, face a complex landscape when they're trying to navigate the system to find help. So let's go to Yua Chen and Kimberly to talk about their backgrounds and then what they're seeing around the issue, how widespread it is, and the data that we have here in Georgia. For example, I know that in 2022, there were 129,528 crisis calls to the Certified Family Violence and Sexual Assault agencies, and that's 13% higher than before the pandemic. So we know the numbers are rising. So let's talk to Yua Chen first. Can you tell us a little bit about your role and a little about the work that you're doing and the people you are helping?
Yes, hi. Hello, this is Hua Chen from Women's Resource Center, and thank you for inviting me to the panel. So I work for Women's Resource Center doing domestic violence. We are a local DV agency in DeKalb County for almost 30 years. Our center provides a 24-hour hotlines. We have emergency DV shelter, legal program, and also support group. And I am a legal advocate who will help with filing a temporary protective order for the court hearing. I'd like to provide a little bit data of the service we have in 2023. Our center provides over services to over 7,000 clients, and our center itself answer over 5,000 crisis calls just in 1 year. The demographic of the client we served are over 80% is African Americans, 92% females. The age is widespread from children to teenager to women and to older population. And we do see that the teen dating violence is a rising issue in our community. The research shows 1 in 10 high school students report experience physical abuse from a dating partners. For the young generations, technology is part of their everyday lives, and they are the most vulnerable populations to experience online harassment or cyberbullying and cyber stalking. And that's why we see today's panel is important, because we can see how technology is affecting our clients, and especially for the teenagers.
And did you also see an uptick in clients with needs during the pandemic as well?
Yes, we do. So the pandemic is a very challenging time for the DV survivors. We see the survivors, they are forced to lock down with the abusers. It's hard for them to get out of the house. It's hard for them to reach out for help. And we see our client, they suffer from loss of employment and also experience financial hardship. Especially in the beginning of the pandemics, the courthouse is shut down, so that the in-person filing and in-person hearing are no longer available. So in this time, we do see the technology plays an important role in terms of the temporary protective order filing. The DeKalb County Magistrate Court and the clerk's office, they switched the filing process from in-person to online. And we also see the virtual, that the hearing is now held virtually via Zoom, so that during the pandemic, we see that the technology is actually helping the clients to improve their safety during the time. Yeah.
You made some really good points, particularly about how the younger generation, Gen Z, is both more at risk and then also more likely to utilize technology as that bridge between them and the resource. So Kimberly and Alita, Can you talk to us a little bit, each of you, about your role, and then answer similarly about what you're seeing and what occurred during the pandemic?
So when I explain my role, I like to say conflict is a business of law, and lawyers are the primary gatekeepers in our society. At Atlanta Housing, I safeguard the agency from harm. We want to drive responsible growth, be dependable and a trusted advisor here at the agency. But we also have to make some informed decision-making and creative problem-solving to facilitate our programs. As Deputy General Counsel, I provide litigation and compliance and programmatic support. When you all reached out and asked us to be a part of this panel, I was excited to do it because it's something that Aletta and I deal with every day, and I'm going to give her an opportunity to introduce herself. But also, this year marks a decade that a childhood friend of mine was murdered by her estranged husband in my hometown of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Those statistics were on the uptick there, and our sorority, Alpha Kappa Alpha, sponsors an annual event now in honor of Illyria because she was murdered doing the right thing. But we see lots of this type of violence that ends like that. I work closely with Aletta, who handles all of our violence against women applications where people submit and ask to avail themselves of VAWA and to be protected. And I want to give her an opportunity to introduce herself and talk to you about what her role is and what she has seen during the pandemic and before the pandemic. Aletta?
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much. This is an honor to be a part of this important conversation. I was really excited to receive the invitation. I handle the domestic violence cases for Atlanta, and that is for those persons who currently have what is called a housing choice voucher, formerly known as Section 8. So if one is experiencing domestic violence and they are in need of transferring from maybe one unit to another, or even possibly porting out of state in order to seek safety, I assist them from the beginning of that process until they're actually housed. I also assist those who may be porting from other housing authorities who are escaping domestic violence as well. As it relates to the pandemic, I can say that throughout 2020 and 2021, the numbers were not as high as 2022. And I contribute that mostly because of the moratorium on rent and units that were available because landlords were unable to evict people. So unfortunately, there was nowhere to go. However, 2022, I definitely saw a huge increase in domestic violence cases, especially as the courts opened up and as children returned back to school.
So we serve about 25,000 low-income and socioeconomically disadvantaged households across the city of Atlanta, about 50,000 people. We offer services to the most vulnerable and at-risk populations, which includes victims of intimate partner violence, domestic violence. In Georgia, 35.1% of women and 39.9% of men experience intimate partner violence, which includes physical violence, sexual violence, stalking, financial violence, all those things that kind of you're in a relationship that has some ramifications to you that are not good for you. So I want to share with you all the slide of what that, I think I went too soon. Hold on just a second. A little technology challenge here. I have to open up my Zoom so I can share my screen, and we will share the PowerPoint, and I'm gonna do this.
We can see it.
Okay, and I'm gonna see if I can go back. Oh, of course, nope, that's not it. Hold on just a second.
Yeah.
All right, there we are. So, wait a minute. There we are. Okay. So here are the statistics. Aletta, you want to go over the statistics?
Sure, I'd be happy to. In 2022, there were 129,528 crisis calls to Georgia Certified Family Violence and Sexual Assault Agencies, which is a 13% increase from 2021. Then there were 193 known domestic violence fatalities in Georgia, specifically in 2022. In 2022, firearms were the cause of death in 81% in all family violence fatalities. That is phenomenal. In fiscal year 2022, and that is the period of July 2021 through June 2022, during the height of the pandemic, Georgia's 48 state-certified domestic violence programs sheltered 6,123 victims and their families. They provided 152,189 beds for shelter. And get this, 24,346 victims and their children were turned away from domestic violence due to a lack of bed space.
So when you look at those kinds of statistics, you really see that what is going on in the state of Georgia is really serious. I'm sure that other states are experiencing the same types of things, but like Dr. Cruz said earlier, under VAWA, we are able to provide protections to survivors of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault. Last year, as was mentioned earlier, HUD announced new resources to advance housing protections for survivors. There's a new website. There was a notice about the enforcement. They added $5 million funding to training and technical advice to grantees and other stakeholders. And then VAWA applicants and tenants of certain programs, they can't be denied housing, evicted, or have their housing assistance terminated because they've experienced domestic violence or dating violence. They can request what comes into us more often than not, an emergency transfer for safety reasons related to violence. And we see that oftentimes, the request for transfer. And we'll talk more about that and what that looks like, and as a practical matter, what that involves and how sometimes victims put others at jeopardy in themselves when we talk about technology and how they interface.
Absolutely. And, before I segue back to technology, that just makes me think about how with that enormous gap of all those people who needed help, that's a way that technology can help alleviate, because there are only so many practitioners, and there's certainly a burnout for practitioners, and any kind of alleviation to help them do their jobs better is a powerful tool. So Dr. Talwalkar, let's talk a little bit about what you've learned about AI as you've continued to use this technology. Can you talk us about a scenario, maybe walk us through how a potential model like this might assist a survivor?
Sure. So let me give you an introduction of what if built as a prototype model. So we have what is known as scenarios. The scenarios identify the cognitive vulnerability of the victim. We have lists of these vulnerabilities with us, and exploitation tactics. Now, there are in cybersecurity, we use TTPs, which are tactics, techniques, and procedures very commonly. But the use of these terms for cognitive security is a fairly new domain in cybersecurity or information security, I would say. And the tool tries to map these tactics and vulnerabilities, and with scenarios that we have identified. And it sort of suggests what scenario would be appropriate for a clinician to have a scenario walkthrough. And eventually the plan, as the storyboard that Dr. Crook shared with you, eventually the plan is that we use generative AI to create these scenario walkthroughs.
And Dr. Crooks, I was going to ask you, can you talk a little bit about psychological coercive control in AI?
Sure. So as Sneha was just talking about, our AI model, the AI model she is prototyping, is informed by cognitive security frameworks, which are based in the idea of you may not have heard of this, our audience may not be familiar with this, but it's called the OODA loop. It's orienting, observing, and deciding and acting. I think I might have said those in reverse order. So observing, orienting, deciding and acting. So that's where the OODA, OODA comes from. Okay. So our instance-based learning model, which is what we're starting with because it's useful when you don't have a lot of data to train a model on. So you use what basically are knowledge-based expert models to impose what little data you have onto existing structures that help you determine what's happening based on expert knowledge. So one of the expert knowledge pieces we have is something like, how does the OODA loop work? Well, technically what happens with a lot of psychological manipulation is it's that manipulation of information that the victim or survivor is actually taking in from their abuser. So the abuser will tell them things that aren't true, for example, or they may tell them part truths where there's a kernel of truth, but then the rest is made up. So it sounds more believable that way. And the target of that kind of manipulation may begin to believe what they're being told. There may be a lot of use of put downs or derogatory statements or shaming or worse things that also break the person down. So they're more susceptible to any information that they're being told from their abuser. So that is one type, or actually a combination of tactics that our cognitive security model may become aware of, may understand through example of what those might look like if you were to describe them in words. And so our instance-based learning model will learn how to recognize those specific things that are going on as long as they have historical information that is inputted by either the clinician or through working directly with the patient in session. So there's going to always need to be this. In this kind of model, the model's constantly learning. It starts with a basis of knowledge that you gain from case studies or things you know from research or other people you may have interviewed in stakeholder interviews. But as it interacts with each of its intended recipients, so in this case would be the clinician and the patient, it learns new information, it learns new examples. The clinician and patient help define what those examples mean, and then the AI model, the instance-based learning model, learns that over time, so it gets better at identifying. Once it's identified these different scenario elements, these different tactics and different examples of those tactics in real life, it is, as Sneha was talking about, mapping the cognitive security models to the interventions. The interventions are the things that one can do to fight against those examples, right? So each example it takes in from the real life scenario, it's going to be paired with a solution potentially of what to do in response. And that could take a variety of different, solution types. It could be a direct action. It could be a stop and process what just happened with the clinician to work through something. It could be looking up references or resources so that they can get more information. It could be something they might have to do with their device in order to change the privacy settings. So it could be anything like that, but it's tailored directly to the experience of that individual in that setting. Did that answer your
Makes
question?
sense. It did. And it also puts me onto another question. So talking about solutions, your original concept that you set us up with fighting technology threats through technology. I've seen so many articles from tech firms, including Google, about AI being used potentially to address medical illnesses or needs and how that might be helping women specifically. Can you talk about positive research you've seen, findings that might support AI as a tool for those kind of things?
Yeah, so there's a variety of research that is, I think, just in the last few years, I've seen a real rise in the exploration of using AI for these kinds of interventions where, it may be something that normally a real person does, but because of the work saturation, the task saturation and the mental workload involved in just keeping up, or maybe they're understaffed and so their caseload is super heavy, which we can all imagine and probably have experienced. It's really, the AI can act as an assistive tool to offload some of that burden, but the context in which it has to be used needs to be really understood well. And it needs to be, the research needs to involve the people who are actually doing the things that the AI is being built for. That's what the human-centered design process is about. So I can't list off a specific research group off the top of my head, but it's a very easy search on artificial intelligence for psychotherapy, for example, or something along those lines if you have a specialty in mind that you want to see if AI has been used for. But I can see a lot of research in healthcare in general. I mean, you go beyond psychotherapy, which is sort of my domain that I work in, but in healthcare in general, it's anything from organizing data to identifying specific things in the data to managing intakes to helping with clinical diagnostic processes to direct interventions, you name it. And also, I think a space that is actually really open for a lot more exploration is how do you develop AI for use with patients or clients outside of the clinical session when there's nobody around to supervise, right? So we're specifically looking at clinician supervision of the AI. The AI is there to facilitate, but not to lead, not to be by itself and go unsupervised. And so we determined to focus in this area for safety reasons and ethical reasons at this point. But there is a space for outside of the clinical session, but it opens up a lot of other questions about how do you rely upon an artificial assistant who is not human, who has to maybe act like a human or think like a human in some cases to understand what their client is experiencing, who's the user, and then do something. So if you're looking at older adults, for example, elders, so if they are in their house by themselves and they're using some kind of AI assistant, where there are many ethical and safety issues involved in that, but there is research being done in that area. So there are exciting possibilities, but it raises a lot of questions as you go as well. So I would say we want to proceed with caution, but the potential is there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about, as you said, you have to really hone in so it knows what it's supposed to do. But then I also think about the volume of paperwork, like you have to fill out so much paperwork. I think about the potential applications for some of those forms to be alleviated through AI. Have you yet seen that?
Yeah, so far we haven't not be able to use the AI to fill out paperwork because it is very personalized, and then so that might be in the future if the technology is available. But I do want to add one point to respond to Dr. Cruz, their research. So as a domestic violence advocate, we are looking forward to see the AI technology to use as psychotherapy for the domestic violence survivors. But we also want to be very cautious when it is introduced to them, because domestic violence is very complicated dynamics. So each individual, they face different level of danger when they are in an abusive relationship. And that is why the safety planning is always the most important things when we provide our advocacy to the clients. So while we can see that AI research, they can use the psychotherapy to break the mental control, coercive control from the abuser, but we also want to remind that the control from the abuser, a lot of times from physical violence, is from verbal threat, financial abuse. And then, so it is most of the time just beyond the mental manipulations. And we want to remind that for a survivor to leave the abusive relationship is the most dangerous time for them. So that we do think that if we want to help the survivor to safely leave the abusive relationship, it still relies on the direct advocacy from the trained domestic violence advocate. But we are looking forward to see how the AI technology can in the future can help to build a bridge to lead them to make it less intimidating to reach out for help. I think this is what we are looking for.
Absolutely. And you, go ahead, Dr. Crooks.
Oh, I was just going to say, yes, I completely agree. And we actually had a similar conversation when we were trying to decide what part of this process should we be focused on in our initial AI design use cases. And my first thought was, we do not want to introduce something like this that we are experimenting with while someone is still trying to get away from a relationship, or they're still in the relationship, or they're still in the home. That is, for reasons you just stated, a very dangerous time. And it any sort of technology that we might introduce, if it doesn't work as intended, it could make the situation worse. It could make the situation worse inadvertently, even if it did work as intended. So our initial focus is on once the person leaves and is actually in receiving services and treatment of some kind, trying to reconstruct their lives, and is safely away for the most part, but they are still struggling for whatever reason. And it's possible that their abuser may still be reaching out online, which is, another focus, the cybersecurity part, the cognitive security part of our focus, but they're not physically able to get to the person. However, you still have to risk manage, and that is part of the clinical process as well, as understanding if I were a clinician, understanding my patient's present situation and what are the risks involved there. And so you're absolutely right that risk management and safety planning is always at the top of the list. Even if the safety threat is not from the abuser, it could be from whatever outcome the person's experiencing. They may be experiencing substance abuse, suicidality, anything like that as a result of their abusive experience. So the AI is there to work with in our use case, but it's not front and center.
And you both make an important point. Till now, we've talked very much about the physical realm. Let's talk now about how, with technology's changes, a lot of violence has moved online. As a cybersecurity technologist myself, I every single day see ways that clients in very different situations are needing to remove themselves from online threats. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about a survivor's already sought out help. They've removed themselves physically from this threat, but then the violence moves online instead. So there are basic cybersecurity practices. Sneha, you've mentioned this. Dr. Crooks, you've mentioned this. I work with NIST 100-171 from a very different perspective, from a cybersecurity business perspective, but there's also NIST frameworks for other technologies. There are a lot of different frameworks to confront digital vulnerabilities. So let's keep it on you for a minute and talk about what issues you've seen with your clients about online concerns and what advice you've been offering them.
So that we definitely see is rising. The cyber stalking is happening to the domestic violence survivors. We see that the abuser, they are using technology to stalk the survivors. They will use social media harassment. They track the survivor's location using the device tracker or the the location sharing app in their phones. They can also install a spy software in their phone to just place them under surveillance, so that we as an advocate, when we help our client to do the safety planning, we will remind them to be aware of what their trace. Do not leave any trace when you are trying to run away from the survivors. You can change your phone number. You can change to get a new device. And then also that it's important that when you get a new device, make sure you do not back up the the app that you previously had, because you might have some spy app in there. And it's always helpful to work with the domestic violence advocate to see if they can personalize the safety planning for you.
Those are such important points. And we see this all the time. And we've mentioned that younger women are very much at risk and they live their lives online. They've grown up with technology. And we see this with clients all the time, that if you're public facing, your location can be exposed. Your current habits can be visualized. People know where you're going, where you're coming, what times of day, and that puts you at a new threat. So you, of course, want to lock those devices down and protect yourself. So all these tips are very crucial for online safety in general. But in particular, let's talk about when you're in a vulnerable position. So Kimberly, are you also seeing cybersecurity risks in your work that have emerged since the pandemic?
I have. We use VAWA to help people get a move. I had a particular case where we moved a young lady because she saw her new boyfriend shoot and kill her ex-boyfriend. And so she was actually the witness for the case. I worked with the U.S. Attorney's Office. She was a recipient of a subsidy. She had a voucher. We moved her, and she continued to log into her Instagram and Facebook when she went out dining, when she checked in at different places. And it came to the point where one of the apartments where we moved her, like the second or third move, that there were other witnesses for other federal cases living there. So she's putting other folks at risk. So we had to pull her into the office and remind her that they're able, she kept calling, complaining that the family of the person who was arrested for the murder kept showing up where she was. And I had to remind her that it was she who was logging in on social media, telling them where she was. I understand that. I think that, well, I'm a Generation Xer, so I'm not as skilled, but I understand young people, wanting to share their location with people and to do all of that. But we had to get her to recognize under VAWA, we have to adhere to the Federal Privacy Act. And we can't share people's personally identifiable information. We have to be very cognizant. Aletta keeps those files separately when we have people who ask for VAWA protection. Not a whole lot of people in the agency would have access. They would have to go through her as the gatekeeper for that. And so if we're doing all of those extra things to protect you and your safety, I need you to collaborate and work with us in doing that. Now, I think that what the advocate said about using technology to harass and threaten and coerce is absolutely true. But there are also so many benefits to technology. We have access to online apps, hotlines, victim information. We can talk to other advocates, other survivors. We can provide platforms to have a voice for those people. But more importantly, like in a city like Atlanta, where there are so many jurisdictions, you go 5 miles outside the perimeter, you may be in another jurisdiction. The great thing about technology, we're able to file complaints across jurisdictional borders, and people are able to know that this person is wanted and caught for doing this. And so I think that's the great thing about technology, but I think it's a gift and a curse. What we also see too, as far as the information that people are able to provide, we're able to have film, videos of abuse. We're able to have recordings of abuse, but we have to educate our survivors, our victims, that they have to make an effort to keep their information private and to be careful about sharing their digital lives. It's so important for us, and important for them, and important for other folks if they're at a safe house and there are other families. So we just have to remind them of that.
Absolutely. And it's just such a different time. 20 years ago, you didn't have to think about protecting your digital self as well as your physical self. And now there's this added layer that, as you mentioned, has all these opportunities for good, but only if it's utilized properly. So let's go back to Dr. Crooks and Mrs. Talawalker, and talk about how you've incorporated cybersecurity into the work that you're doing. How did you go about securing your work? And talk to us a little bit about practices that you think are really important for practitioners to think about holistically in terms of cybersecurity.
Yeah, I think from a psychotherapy practitioner perspective, one of the reasons we wanted to do this in the first place was because we understood that psychotherapy practitioners are experts in psychotherapy, and they may be experts in other things too, but we can't assume they're cybersecurity experts, right? So we wanted to find a way to build in basic cyber hygiene practices and knowledge and exercises or mitigating actions that somebody could take based on the thing they were experiencing into the tool we were trying to develop. Yet we also wanted to, at the same time, address some of the unique features of the vulnerabilities that domestic abuse victims and survivors are carrying with them. So this is why we wanted to embed both cybersecurity risk mitigations along with cognitive security risk mitigations and package it inside of something that could be used in a psychotherapy setting. So that's kind of the reason we took the approach that we did. And I will let Sneha describe how we approached embedding some of those cybersecurity mitigations where we got them from. They weren't just us saying, what to do, but we actually got them from somewhere. And then also, since we are at the prototype stage, we have not needed to secure our work yet because we're still building our work and it's not fielded or anything yet. But we do have to consider when the tool is alive and being developed and in testing phases, and it's eventually, ideally, going to be tested with real potential stakeholders. How do we secure the information that they're putting into the tool? So this isn't something we want on, a general server somewhere. This needs to be HIPAA compliant. It needs to be self-contained, so that data doesn't go anywhere. It needs to be protected through logins and password and other privacy firewalls. And their organization might also have other things that, we need to package it inside of. So there's all those considerations that still need to be thought of as we move forward. That's part of the reason that we have the stakeholder interaction through the process. It's not just how might we use this tool, but what are all the things we need to consider from your perspective, from the stakeholders' perspective. And so that has to get baked into the design as well. So Sneha, I'll turn it over to you for some of the more cybersecurity technical elements.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Crooks. So I think these are some great examples that were shared. And our perspective is that we bring the survivors back to let them use the online apps like Instagram. And the cybersecurity countermeasures that we normally use, for instance, the cyber hygiene countermeasures that were discussed earlier. I think it is important to walk the survivor through those scenarios and to walk them through the process of how to utilize those apps, not enable their location sharing during these psychotherapy sessions that Dr. Crooks discussed, so as to make sure that the apps are used in a proper way.
Very holistic.
Holistically, without leaving any loopholes.
Absolutely. And you touch on so many important points because, therapists, doctors, lawyers, public service agencies, they're all using online portals where, as Kimberly mentioned, you've got to be really mindful about sensitive information and where it's living and who has access to it. So that's why we have HIPAA and high trust and all these different things. So let's talk, Dr. Crooks, a little bit about some technical resources and how we can amplify them. How do you think the work you're doing, you can see applications for augmenting and complementing the work on the ground that Kimberly and you do?
Yes, well, we are working in our work is research right now. Okay, so research to improve conditions for survivors and practitioners and community professionals who work with survivors as well. So we want to hear from the people on the ground because that is the entire reason we're doing our research. We're not just doing our research to do research. We want to do something and build something that is actually going to be meaningful and make the people on the ground's work easier. And from a certain level. It's always going to be hard work, but at least we can maybe alleviate some of the burden that they have to deal with day to day as far as workload and management of what they're trying to accomplish. So one of the ways we can help is to, as part of our interventions, it can contain all of the immediate and relevant resources as far as, the housing resources, the legal resources, places that can be called, places that can be gone to for shelter in the person's particular area. And that can be part of the information output that might be included in the AI model that can be continually updated. So it's extending the reach of the marketing for those resources so that people have that information. They don't always know where to go. The clinicians don't always know where to send people or who to talk to. And so they may need a professional consult for a particular instance, that comes up, a particular need that comes up during a session. So that's one way we can help alleviate some of the burden of just knowing what you don't know and knowing what's out there.
Absolutely. And, going back to some initial conversations as we wrap up, because we're getting close to time, we got so absorbed. We're 5 minutes out. So let's get toward the end. I've noticed both Yua and Kimberly and Alita, you mentioned all this isolation that we're seeing, this increase in isolation for clients. So for clients who are overwhelmed and they're looking at their phones at night and trying to find resources, where do you both recommend that they start? I'll give it to Kimberly first, and then UI, you can go next.
So we have resources available. We have wraparound resources here at the agency. And of course, HUD's VAWA site is a great place to go for those resources. But you can also visit our website. What I like to think about when I think about the work that I do with Alita and across the agency, we have resources where we want to get folks housed. But I think that everyone has the attitude here at Atlanta Housing with victims of intimate partner violence or domestic violence. We have empathy, your pain in our heart. And so, we have opportunities here where I've seen Alita's boss, the senior vice president of the voucher program, take people to a hotel and pay out of her pocket to put them up. We wanted to create 50 purses for unhoused women or women of domestic violence. And I sent out an email and said, we want to pack 50 purses. We wind up doing 175 with toiletries and other things. So I think that in addition to what we can provide through the agency, everyone is genuinely concerned about the welfare and the well-being of these folks. So we go above and beyond to make sure that we offer those wraparound resources we have with our partners across the city. So that's what we offer. And you can visit our website to find out more about them. And you can also go to the HUD.gov VAWA website to find out more about it.
Yua.
Yes. So the resource, the first resource I would like to provide would be the National Domestic Violence Hotline number. That is 1-800-799-7233. It is 24 hours. And then this can be the first number you call if you were looking for any resource. They will connect you with your local domestic violence agency. I think it's always helpful to go to the local DV agency's website to see what kind of service they provide that might help you. Another resource I would like to bring up is there's an app, it's called Bright Sky. It's an app that designed for the domestic violence survivors. Then they will tell you what's the warning sign of domestic violence. They will help you to find the resource. And it's an app that you can actually hide in your phone. So for your safety, you can just look into that anytime, whenever you are safe.
Incredible resources. And I know we've gathered some of these resources for our attendees. And after this conversation, we're going to have TAG send them out to you so that if you know anyone who needs these, you'll have a readily accessible packet of resources. So as we close it out, I know this is a lot of information to absorb. We'd like to open it up to our audience. If you have any questions for our experts, we are happy to talk to you for a few more minutes and see how we might answer them. And before we start the questions, thank you so much to our esteemed panelists, for taking time out of their already busy days to talk about this important conversation about the intersection of technology and resources and how we can help bridge many gaps. And thank you to all of the attendees as well for attending and listening. Please don't hesitate to send us your questions. We'll take a look at the chat and see if there's anything we can answer. I feel like we've done too good of a job. There are very few questions. And that's what we want. You're probably all still absorbing what was, I would say, a PhD level expert panel of all of these topics. Thanks, Jessica, for monitoring. And we're exactly at 4, so we're perfectly on time. Well, it looks like we don't have any questions today from the chat. So hopefully you'll all look forward to getting our follow-up email with the resources that were mentioned. But Yuwa, Dr. Crooks, Sneha, Kimberly, Alita, we can't thank you enough. Thank you for all you do. Thank you for all your work. And thank you for being here today with us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. It was great being on the panel with you all.
Thank you, ladies.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.